Well, good evening, everybody. This is the 10th lesson? Wow. No, the 11th lesson in Corinthians, 1 Corinthians. So we're back in 1 Corinthians. We're at the end of chapter 9 this week. Last little bit there in chapter 9. But of course we know from what we've been studying in 1 Corinthians that, first of all, that Corinth was a very metropolitan city, if you know what I mean, and they were very sexually immoral, the city was, and with a lot of the temples dedicated to that. But we look at Paul addresses the church there, and they had been dividing themselves up. I was baptized by Paul, I was baptized by Peter, or Cephas is what they said there, and so forth. And they were finding ways to separate themselves from one another, is what they were doing. And, I'm so much more this or so much more that than you. We got to keep in mind the Greeks were very much in the knowledge, belief in knowledge, is elevating and so forth. So, this was a Greek city. And Paul kind of got on to him a little bit about that. He said, Christ is the only one that died for you. None of these other guys died for you. And all these people that think they're so smart, well, they're not. Their wisdom has been deceiving them. And then he started talking about marriage and not getting married and sexual sin and dealing with sin in the church. And, he made the statement that's used a lot, a little bit of a little bit of yeast leavens the whole batch. And he went through and talked about that. And then he started talking about, if you can do it, dedicate your life to God. If you can get away with not being married, that's a pretty good thing. But if you can't, it's okay to be married as well. So he was saying, in some ways, this is better, but this is okay too. And there are things like that we deal with. And in chapters 8 and 9, he's been dealing with the weaker and stronger brother. Of course, he's been specifically talking about eating meat sacrificed in the temples. That's specifically what he was talking about. But of course, we can expand that to any issue. One group understood that it was nothing, but the other group thought it was. And Paul basically pointed out, hey, all you guys that the stronger brother needs to be looking out for the weaker brother in essence, and need to be considerate of them, because the last thing you want to do is impact them in a negative way. Or for them to fall would be the ultimate bad thing to happen. Basically, if you should abstain if you need to for your brother. Yeah, you may be able to eat it, and that may be okay, but if it causes a brother to fall, you shouldn't be doing it, because you need to be looking out for your brothers and your sisters. This is about love. And he kind of touches on this a little bit as we continue to move through this section, because he continues to talk about it. And it says, in essence, he's like, the love of your brother should be more important than your freedom. Basically. Then he goes on in chapter 9. He uses himself in chapter 9 as an example. The first part of the chapter that we're jumping back into tonight, he said, I have every right in the world to make a living from the church. Look at all of those that do. Look at Peter and his wife. He takes his wife along with him. And he uses the oxen as an example in the field while it's plowing. But he said, I didn't do that because I was concerned about anything standing in the way of someone coming to Christ. It would be perfectly fine for me to make a living off of spreading the word of God. But I didn't do it because I didn't want to have a negative impact on anybody. I didn't want anybody to be able to go, well, he's just doing this for a living. He doesn't really believe it, which people can claim all they want, may not be true, but Paul didn't even want to give them that. Then we talked a little bit about the balance between understanding, education, and love for brothers in all things. And now as we pick back up, Paul steps on into the need for self-control, if you will, but he's addressing that, he's still been talking about his brothers and sisters here. And this is what the self-control he's getting to. And just as an odd side note here, he talks about running the race. Y'all have heard me, finish your race, all that sort of stuff. One runs for a crown, so forth. There's an interesting little connection there. All right, they were on Isthmus, which is that little piece of land where Corinth was. And they had games there, the Isthmian Games. I'm having a hard time saying that word. They started in 582 BC, and they were offset from the years of the Olympics. So they were every 2 years. They had basically their own version of the Olympics there on the Isthmus. So Paul knows, y'all are familiar with this, and if you think about that, and then you know what's going on, you kind of it'd be like him referring to someone in the Church of Knoxville, and he talks about the football game, the UT football game, sort of things. How he's starting out there, but he starts out with a rhetorical question in 24, and he says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize." In verse 25, it goes on to say, "Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training." They do it to get a crown that will not last. A lot of times they had laurel and so forth that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. "Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly." And I think this next quote, I'm like, oh, that's pretty. He has a way with words, like somebody just running around, just, running. And he says, "I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." Of course, the prize is salvation, is what he's talking about. And Paul's showing a contrast here, a similarity, but a contrast as well with the Isthmian Games and the Christian walk. The similarities, of course, shouldn't we be training ourselves? Isn't that what we are kind of doing, though? If you think about one of the big differences, there's only one winner in an Olympic race. But we, on the other hand, in our walk of faith, if we complete the race, we are actually winners. So there's a major difference there. But the similarities, how do people train for different things? They said, well, Lance Armstrong, he used to live in the Rockies, and besides all the drugs he would take, he would ride his bike constantly uphill in the Rockies at high altitudes all the time. He literally would train almost every day of the year. Guys on the football team, if they're not training, if they're not practicing, they're lifting weights, aren't they? Sure enough. What about guys that want to play in the NBA? Let's say they're playing in the G League or the B League, or they go to Europe and play to get better so they can get into the other leagues. There's all this training going on, just like Major League Baseball. You got A ball, double A ball, triple A ball. No offense, they may be playing a game at UT here. They may be playing a baseball game, but I guarantee you they're training. Every one of them is thinking about, what if I could make it to the show, which is they call the major leagues. And that is really training for them to get on to the major leagues. But he's saying Olympians train really hard. But what is our training? Can somebody give us me an example of what our training would be? Reading the Bible. Being in the Word of God. Following Jesus' commands would be another. Being among believers. What about maybe not putting ourselves into temptation or tempting situations? What about not polluting our minds and our ears, or, well, our minds with what we watch or what we listen to or stuff like that? That's all training, especially reading the Bible, knowing God's Word. But even coming on Sunday morning, not only is it worship, what we're supposed to be doing, we're also should be getting stronger with that, just as we are, say, on a Wednesday night. But that could also hold true for a ladies' Bible study on Tuesday mornings. It could also hold true for a senior lunch, where you are there to help, not only to socialize, but the truth of the fact is, there's no one that can convince me that nothing ever comes up, that somebody doesn't need something at any of the gatherings. If you never gather, you will never know what's going on in other people's lives, thus being able to help them, or thus them being able to help you. If you consider an athlete, let's look at this just a little bit more. An athlete, they're generally on a fairly strict diet. Now that diet may be eat all the protein you can for a power lifter, or maybe cut out carbohydrates and red meat if you're a long distance runner or something. But eating right as we should, we could say it's kind of like not polluting our bodies with what we let into it, what we watch on TV or what we read or what we listen to. Getting the right amount of rest. An athlete has to rest. They can't go all out and then not have energy for the race. We could almost say that's like us staying away from temptation. I shouldn't probably go over there or do that. I may be able to go over there and do that, just like the Corinthians at the time. Yeah, I can go and eat at the temple, or I can go buy meat from the temple that's been sacrificed, but it's not good all around for the whole picture, if you will. They train for their events. We follow Jesus' commands for our salvation. Any NFL teams, or I would think probably every team sport watches film on their competition. They're watching the team they're about to play, right? Sure they do. Guess what? Reading the Bible, being with our brothers and sisters, also helps us to be aware of Satan's tactics. And also helps us to be aware of our weaknesses. Because not only watching film do you see what they're doing, but all these professionals, they watch film on themselves as well. To know when they have a hole in their swing, or they're MLB player, they might start dipping their arm or something when they swing and it's causing a problem. And they analyze film to see what they're doing to fix the problem. The same goes for us. And the question I have, how are we training, or are we training to finish our race? Okay, I got a great question for a bunch of you in here, including myself. Let's say you want to be a better cook. What do? Maybe go to church, or maybe go to take a class. It'd be kind of like going to a Bible study, wouldn't it? Wait, maybe you read a recipe book, wouldn't it? What do you know? What do you know? That'd be kind of like reading the Bible, right? Well, one of the things you're going to have to do at some point is actually practice. That'd be like putting into practice what you've learned. How about finding a mentor? Did any of you here that cook learn from your mother by chance? Or your grandmother? Or somebody else that you knew that knew how to cook a particular dish really well, and you talked to them about it. Maybe they even showed you how they make the dish. Their mentor. No offense, mentors are good for us in our Christian walk as well. I threw another one down there, but what about watching cooking shows? Of course, I used to work for Food Network, so I couldn't help but throw that in there. And I equated it to like one of the things that Karen and I do, and I do more than we do. But last night we were sitting there watching YouTube videos on different debates about Christians versus atheists. And this atheist they'd cut it up where this atheist challenge the guy or ask this particular type question, and the video is maybe 8 minutes or 11 minutes is how to address that question when someone brings that up. Well, that's educational. That's kind of like watching a cooking show if you wanted to be a better cook, because you learn, you have that information, you know that information, it makes you stronger, and yet you're able, hopefully at some point, to share that dish using the cooking metaphor, if you will. But the other thing, if you look at those verses again, verse 27, "No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I will not be disqualified for the prize." That kind of blows out of the water people that claim once saved, always saved. We have people who say, "Oh, once you're saved, you can never be lost." Well, you can choose to leave your salvation behind. And then one of their, especially the Calvinists' arguments is, well, they were never really saved. Well, then why would Paul be worried about actually losing his salvation? Are you trying to tell me the Apostle Paul really wasn't saved? Or he wasn't sure if he was saved or not? There's a lot of holes in that argument that they make. But as we move into chapter 10 here now, we kind of have a little bit of a subject change. He's kind of warning them again. He is warning them, but it still harkens back from all of chapter 8 and chapter 9. And he warns them using examples from Israel's past. So we jump into this and it says, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and they all passed through the sea." What is he talking about now? They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they all drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. The gist of it? Hey, if you think you're safe, Don't forget the Israelites. They literally were following the cloud of God, following the pillar of fire at night, literally went through the parting of the Red Sea, watched the Egyptians behind them be drowned to death, literally didn't have anything to drink and were complaining, and Moses hit a rock with his staff and water flowed out, enough to quench the thirst of a few million people and all their cattle and all their sheep and all their goats, all from a rock. And yet, all it takes is Moses going up on the mountain, Sinai, and meeting with God, where they can see what's going on. But they get impatient, and what do? They create a false graven image. They create a golden calf. And yet they had seen all of the miracles in Egypt. And they've seen all of this happen. And they grumble. And they complain. And they turn away. If those people that saw all that were literally following the presence of God, can turn away at the drop of a hat, in essence what Moses is saying is, you better not be arrogant and think that you're so great you're never going to fall, or that's not a possibility for you, because he's being blunt. It is. Anybody that's been, self-reflection is a good thing. But none of us should think that we are at a point in life where we could never be tempted or we could never be driven away. One of the things one of the videos Karen and I happened to watch last night on YouTube, was a guy, I think it was last night, or maybe I watched it today, Karen can correct me, but was a gentleman answering atheist questions. He would take an atheist making statements, and then he would let it play, and he'd stop and he'd talk about it. And one of the things he kept saying is, man, why are these people so mad? If they don't believe in God, why are they so mad at God? The video was about bad things happening. The atheists were trying to say, proof that God doesn't exist, and if he does exist, he's an evil God, is bad things happening. And of course, why would God create this world? All of them wanted to say that, and of course he was like, God didn't create this world. This is a fallen world we live in. But all of these people, guess what? Not all of them, but there were video after video of people that were Christians, that had something happen in their life, and they turned against God, and quite frankly had a lot of hate that had turned from pain into hate. We have to be careful, because this life is hard. This life is difficult. There is no one in this life that goes through a life that doesn't have something they wish never happened. Period. Any one of you that's lost somebody knows that. Point blank. We step into verse 6 here, and it says, now these things occurred, talking about, the Israelites in the wilderness. It said, now these things occurred as an example to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. He says, do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Of course, that's Exodus 32. He said, we should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did. And in one day, 23,000 of them died, Numbers 25. And he says, we should not test Christ, as some of them did, and were killed by snakes, Numbers 26. And do not grumble, as some of them did, and were killed by the destroying angel. Okay. There's some hypothesis going on here, what he is actually talking about here in this letter. There's some people hypothesize that some in the church were still visiting temples for sexual purposes, and for food, and for the feasts. And they were like, we know better. It's nothing. We know their little g God is nothing. We believe in God and all that. But they were still doing these things. And Paul's saying, well, consider what happened to the people of Israel. It could be the same thing that is going to happen to you. You associate with this. It's just like, well, let's be honest with you. Is it a good idea for us as Christians to go hang out at the bars where everybody's drinking, getting drunk, and so forth, and us just sitting in Coke? Well, we're just drinking Coke. Is it a good idea to make a practice of that? Now, say you have a friend invite you, and you're trying to talk to that guy about Christ. Is it necessarily sinful to walk into a place that serves alcohol and you not participate? I would say on a limited basis, if you're there for other purposes, sure. Karen and I, we go to restaurants all the time that serve alcohol. There are people that won't go to a restaurant that serves alcohol. But think about any of the nice restaurants or any of the Mexican restaurants here in town. Every one of them does, don't they? Does that mean when you go in you have to drink? Of course not. Let's see here. Verse 9. We should not test Christ as some of them did and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble as some of them did and were killed by the destroying angel. Who's that? We don't necessarily know who the destroying angel was. The angel in the 10th plague in Egypt is named the destroyer, but that's it. We don't know it's angel Gabriel or another one that may or may not have been mentioned. But most consider it a personification of God's righteous anger. Does it matter if it was a particular one? No. Could it have been? Sure. It could have been this particular one, and it may not have been. But that doesn't change the meaning of what was talking about. And conjecture, of course, but some people believe that Paul was addressing the grumbling here because there was already grumbling going on over previous instructions, or he knew him telling the people that were going to the temples that they shouldn't be doing it, that they probably weren't going to like that. Conjecture, of course, but in honesty, it was probably some forethought of what could happen and probably did happen. But that's something that I talked a moment ago about the YouTube videos about these people that claimed to have been Christians and so incredibly bitter now because of something difficult happened in their life, or sad a lot of times happened in their life. Are they not grumbling? I hate to say it, but we don't understand everything in this life. There's no way we can, no way we ever will. God does understand. Yeah, there are things I guarantee you that happened that he wished doesn't because of our actions or because of our sinful nature or because of other people. But in the end, we need to remember God knows more than we could ever even consider. And we've run over by about a minute. So let's go ahead and wrap up. We'll pick up next week in chapter 10, verse 11. Honestly, the rest of this chapter should go pretty fast. I hit a lot of meat there in that section we were in of about 20 verses there. But the next grouping should go a little bit faster. Try to read the rest of 10 and maybe dip into 11. And if you got time, reread 8 and on, which is really, he's talking about this one subject and dealing with our weaker brethren, and how, we need to have self-control. We need to be thinking about them because this is not just about us. It's about all of us, in essence. Thank you. I hope all of you have a wonderful night. If you have any questions, give us a holler. Modine, I hope you feel better. We'll see you later. Kathy, Dale, I hope you two get rested up and cooled off. We'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.